alhamdulillah, we've made it to not just the end of the term, but also to the end of this particular academic year, and really hard to believe that it's been 2 years now that these Friday gatherings have been taking place. And again, all thanks to our brothers Nadeem and Zahir and their families for organizing this every single week. May Allah bless them. So we've been speaking about riba, backbiting. That's what we spoke about last week, but we haven't finished because it's such a lengthy chapter. And one of the things that a few things we'll speak about today, but just as a prelude to that, a thing that really occurs to me when you think about the idea of riba is just the word itself in Arabic. We know that it's formed of 3 basic root letters, which are the ghain, the ra, and the ya, which I know is ghaba, but it's the ya, and the ba, ghaba yaghibu. And that's the root word from which we have the word back, because in this sense it literally means in the absence of. So riba is in the absence of, that's the idea. But if we take those same 3 letters, the ghain, the ya and the ba, and just flip them around like we like doing in these classes, what do we get? We get bagha. And bagha is an interesting word in Arabic, because bagha in Arabic can mean something that you want, or it can mean transgressing the boundaries. So you say to someone, bagha, that someone's gone beyond the scope of acceptability, of what's reasonably expected, or normal standards. They've transgressed. So it's interesting that the word riba is semantically linked to the word bagha, because when you engage in backbiting, what are you doing? You're transgressing someone's rights. So the word itself has this way of telling us, just by rearranging the same 3 root letters, that the act of backbiting is essentially an act of transgression. And then following on from last week, the Imam was about to speak about various subtle ways of backbiting, because there are the obvious ways of saying things about someone, and we learnt last week as well that it's not always just the case that backbiting involves actually saying something, i.e. using language. Backbiting can occur without the need to say anything at all. And so here the Imam moves on to subtle ways of backbiting. And he says that this can be couched in many different ways. And again, he presents us with examples, as in when one may feign, i.e. put on, the idea that they're upset about something that's happening to someone else. And so where the Imam says that if someone were to say, oh, I'm so upset at what has befallen my brother, that his character has become so obnoxious. Right? So what you're doing is essentially you're backbiting them, but you're couching the manner of your backbiting in a concern for this person. But what the Imam is telling us is that in actuality, that this person who's engaging in this type of activity is lying. Why? Because he says that if the person was truly saddened by his brother's state, he would privately make dua for that person. And there would be no need to say anything about someone's faults or errors in public at all. And then he says, well, there are other such examples, as in when someone may actually couch their riba in supplication. Such, for example, if you say, we ask Allah to grant such a person relief from their bad manners, to improve their bad manners, and may Allah guide you, my brother, you're not really, that sort of a thing. But you can even come across as doing it sincerely. And what the Imam is saying here, that such a supplication is in fact hiding a maliciousness in someone's heart. Because what you're doing is you're taking Allah's name in vain. You're using Allah's blessed name, and the honorable activity, the sacred activity of supplication, of dua, for your nefarious purposes, for purposes that are not noble. So that's what Sayyidina Ali would say, kalimatul haqq yuradu biha al-batil, that these are true words, but what's intended by them is something far from the truth. So words in their prima facie sense and what we hear aren't always what's really being conveyed. And the Imam mentions similarly, if we find amazement in someone else's backbiting, and then we in fact encourage them to say more. So someone says something about someone, say, this is astonishing, I never knew that about them. So what you've done is that you've replied back to someone's activity of backbiting by telling them that this is an incredible thing that I'm hearing. And that type of noise, if you like, that's what it is, that will motivate someone to continue in the thing that they're saying. Because everyone, as soon as it's natural, if you sit and people are nodding your head, you're going to tend to focus on that person because you tend to see that person's listening to what I'm saying, right? It's just how human nature is. And so this is an example of when someone backbites, when someone reciprocates your backbiting by astonishment and amazement, we tend to want to continue on. Let me tell you something else then you didn't know. It just goes on to another thing, right? And so the Prophet ﷺ said that if a believer is humiliated in someone's presence and he fails to aid him while being able to aid him, Allah will humiliate him before all creatures on the day of resurrection. So in other words, if we are privy, if we are in the presence of someone who's backbiting someone, and we don't stop it, whilst being able to stop it, then we know that the hadith here where the Prophet ﷺ is telling us that Allah will humiliate that person before all creatures on the day of resurrection.
So we have to stop it.
You have to stop it. Now, of course, there are certain instances where you may not be able to stop it, but those instances are very extreme. For instance, you might be in danger, your life may be in danger or something like that. Very extreme cases where no one has to even explain to you that you don't need an excuse here just to stay silent. Right? But most instances that we encounter of backbiting are not of that nature. They're of a nature that we can actually stop. And they occur all around us. And if we don't stop it, you can just say something as simple as, I wouldn't really think like that. I probably wouldn't say that. Maybe, you don't have to confront someone. You can just offset it in a certain way. Yeah, maybe it's, it could be something else. You need to develop a way of engaging people's backbiting such that it becomes reactionary for you to say certain things if you're in the presence of backbiting. Because to stay silent, as we're told in other hadith, that the Prophet ﷺ tells us that backbiting is not just the person who's actually backbiting, it's the one who's listening as well. So the activity of backbiting relates to not just one backbiting, but the one who's on the other end, i.e. the recipient who's listening to the backbiting. They are both equally engaged in the activity, and the hadith are very clear about this. So it's not an excuse to say, well, but I didn't say anything, I didn't engage in it, I stayed quiet. It's not an excuse. Some of the greatest people you're going to meet in your life and the people that you will look back on are the ones who stand up in the midst of wrongdoing. If you come across and we still speak about such people. We've known people in our lives, going back a long time ago, and it wasn't really a matter of whether someone's deeni or not deeni. It was just the person was a good person and never allowed someone else to be mentioned in their company, right? You get people, and we still, mashallah, speak about such people, right? And then the Imam moves on to explain, okay, why is it that people backbite? What's the motivation? What gets us to open our mouth in ways that we shouldn't? And he provides us with a whole list of reasons, which we can't go through every single one, but we'll just pick a few. He says, people sometimes backbite to vent or rage anger. And that when one's anger erupts, they vent it by mentioning the faults of others. So So let's say you're riled up about something, you're angry about something. It could be unrelated to, so it could either be unrelated to a particular individual, or your anger could be in relation to a particular individual. But in both instances, it's your anger is now giving you that opportunity that I'm angry as it is, let me just continue on now. And I'll just start venting about things. We have this amazing ability to be able to introduce into our discussion people and scenarios and events that have no reason to be there. And we'll do that as a result of our anger. And then what we do, we begin. Now, the thing about anger is that once someone is angry, well, there's no stopping someone. Because even a reasonable person will observe you and think, yeah, okay, maybe we should just leave that person alone. Because saying something may actually get them more riled up. Oh, you don't know, what do you mean? I should be quiet, that type of thing. So one of the things is anger. Now, this is when the Imam speaks about, okay, what are the treatment plans, if you like? What are the cures for all of this? And he says, well, each cure depends on the underlying reason and cause. And we know that anger is one of those things in the deen where the Prophet ﷺ, when someone came to him and said, a companion said to him, asked him, advise me. And what did the Prophet ﷺ say? La taghdab. Right? Don't get angry. And then he asked him again. And he said the same thing again. La taghdab. And again, the third time, La taghdab. He said, don't get angry. Because ultimately, anger doesn't get you anywhere. Anger is a reaction which is, in one sense, because someone may say, well, okay, how about getting angry for the sake of Allah? That's not called anger in strict terms. That's why even in Arabic, it's called, sort of, in English, if you were to express it, would say it's cold anger. Because you don't have this rush of blood to your head. You don't feel vented in the way that you do when you are venting with anger. So aside from the places where, if someone's rights are being transgressed, of course we should feel upset and bothered by that. But that type of anger is different. Actual anger never achieves anything. If anything, every tradition of humankind, whether it be the Greeks, the Indians, the Arabs, the Africans, any nation, any civilization have always understood the pitfalls of anger. That how many nations have been destroyed as a result of anger. A particular sultan took a decision because someone upset him, and it was in anger and in retribution. Because anger then is a cause of further injustice. And there are books on this. I think there's a famous book from the time of the Stoics, which is about on anger. It's a whole book, and I remember reading it once and coming across things thinking, wow, I never even thought that the furthest consequences of one's anger could in fact lead to the destruction of civilization. Right? Then the Imam says that sometimes people backbite seeking the approval of peers, or to flatter friends, or to support them when they speak about others. Right? That if you're amongst people that gain amusement through abusing someone's reputation, then you want to sometimes just go along with it. That's your circle. You don't, how can I speak other than what I know in amongst my circle, right? And so either you're going to go along with it and approve it, or worse still, you'll add to the insults because you want to seek recognition. And that's the thing, you see, that the jalis, your companion, that the people that you sit with and you spend time with, it's so important to look well into your friends. And just that word majlis, in Arabic, majlis, jalis is the name of someone you sit with, right? Dhahir is my jalis, I tend to sit with him, right? So in Arabic, the word jalasa, which is where the word jalis comes from, has 3 root letters. What is it? The jim, the lam, and the sin, jalasa. And if you just take those 3 letters and you just flip them around again, same 3 letters, what do you get? Sajala. Right? And what's a musajjal in Arabic? A register that records what you've just done. So in other words, your majlis, your jalis, don't forget that built into that word itself in reality is the idea that everything is being recorded. So look well into who you're sitting with. Right? Many hadith about this. Then the Imam says that sometimes people backbite out of fear that someone will denounce them or speak against them or bear witness or testimony against them. So for instance, let's just say you've just seen someone doing something wrong. It could be a crime or it could be less than that, but just something wrong. And you've seen it, they've seen you see them do it as well. Now, in fear that you're going to now go and say something about this person to other people, they precede you in getting to other people and begin to soil your reputation. Why? Because they're basically hedging their bets here. Thinking, right, this person's seen me doing something wrong. He's got me where I don't want to be. He's going to tell people about what I've done. Let me get in there before anyone else does and tell, did you know such and such about? Why? Because the thinking there is what? If I'm able to soil someone's reputation, then the trustworthiness of anything that they'll say about me can be questioned. So I'm on safer ground here. Look at the Imam. He really understands human beings and how we tend to work. How do we know that the person may have seen us doing something, right, and may never tell anyone, which is the opinion that we should have? Or, and I've heard this from the great people, they say that if you ever get caught doing something wrong, just know that this is a lesson to you from Allah. Watch out. If you think He's watching, I'm watching. Right? So just accept it. Accept it that you've just been, you've done something, you've been caught in a place that you shouldn't have been, and ask Allah to forgive you. Because we know that there were companions. There's one particular companion where he did something once, and he was somewhere that he shouldn't have been. And the Prophet ﷺ happened to just walk by that place. And he saw the Prophet ﷺ, saw him. And he said, I'm never going to go in front. I can't. How can I face the Prophet ﷺ? I'm not going to go in front of him. And so what he would do is that he would come and pray in the masjid in Medina after the Jama'ah. Right? And then one day the Prophet ﷺ saw him and said, you can take as long as you like. I'm sitting here, And so he finished his prayer and he said, Ya Rasulullah. So I said, I'm just so, what can I say? And what does the Prophet ﷺ say to him? He doesn't say, why were you there? What did you do? Why did you do it? He just said, look, all I want you to ask me is to ask Allah to forgive you. That's it. Nothing else. Right? This is the prophetic nature. You look at how the Prophet ﷺ was with his companions. Sometimes I don't like mentioning these stories because I don't want anyone to ever think that the companions, because our framework is the companions didn't make mistakes. And anything that seems like a mistake is a lesson for us to learn. They're the greatest of all generations. And their mistakes are in fact teaching aids for us. That's how we have to look at it. And there are many theological reasons behind that as well. And also just the greatness of who they were, of course. There's one companion with the Prophet ﷺ once, and the Prophet ﷺ was sitting on a riding beast, and the companion was behind him, and some female companion came in front, and the Sahabi from the back was going like this. And what did the Prophet ﷺ do? He just went like that, just to cover him. And then he went this way. And then the Prophet ﷺ moved that way. Right? He never said to him, what are you doing? Why are you doing it? Just gently prevents him from, this is the manner of prophetic instruction. Maybe inshallah from October we'll do just, there's a book about this by Shaykh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghudda, which is Al-Rasul Al-Mu'allim. The Prophet ﷺ as a teacher, how did he instruct his companions? And what was the beautiful ways in which he did that? Now, so fear that someone will denounce you, or one's will toward artificiality and boasting, such that one elevates oneself by putting someone else down. Right? For instance, every person has a specific area of competence or skill, whatever it might be. So the example I'm going to give, just rework it into your minds in relation to the things that you do and you're strong in. So the example the Imam gives, because he's an alim, he's a great scholar, or he's an allama, is when someone says so-and-so is ignorant, his understanding is really weak. He doesn't really get these books. That sort of thing. Because in ilm, what's the thing that students of knowledge tend to say about others? Or may want to say, I should say. No. He's not really that. He doesn't really get it in the way that you should. That type of thing, right? Now, you can do that in relation to anything that we do, whether you work in law, whether you're an accountant, work in IT, whatever it is, you're going to have that and which leads on to the next point, which is a motivation that people tend to have, not a motivation, but an underlying reason, is envy. You backbite others because you're envious of them. If someone receives praise from other people, then subconsciously what you're really doing is you're trying to strip that person of that blessing. Right? You don't really know what that person is like. Or when you hear excessive praise, I knew him before he started doing all of that. Right? You're never gonna, the people won't let it go. They won't let it go what you were if they have envy in their heart. The great people will forget what you've done the moment you've done it. But envious people will never let it go. And a sign of envy, as the Imam is telling us, is these sorts of statements. Oh, I knew so-and-so before they became practicing. You don't even know what they did. What does that have to do with anything? Now, of course, if you're privy, if you want to listen to that, that's an issue in you as well now. What you should say is that, look, Tabarakallah, is it not even greater that Allah's brought this person to where they are, especially from where you're claiming that they came from? I'm even more impressed by them now. Right? So you're almost, fueling that person's envy even more. So that's the thing. We need to let go of the things that we may have known about people and may have done at a certain time in times gone by. It has no bearing. Allah is the one who knows and He forgives. Now, one of the questions that's sort of underlying all of this is, when may speaking about someone, in their absence, actually have a legitimate reason? When can you actually speak? And keep in mind that in such circumstances, we wouldn't term it backbiting. So don't say, when can you backbite someone? Because backbiting is definitionally wrong. You can't backbite. The correct way of speaking about it would be, when can we mention someone in their absence such that it's a legitimate reason to then do that? And the Imam gives us a number of occasions that we can do that. So the first one he says is when someone may be lodging a complaint officially with someone, but with the important caveat that someone can actually do something about it. And the example that the Imam gives here is of a judge. That if a judge were to treat someone unfairly, in an unjust way, then the person can raise a formal complaint to the Sultan or to the Amir or to the Khalifa or to anyone that may deputize for such figures. Why? Because these individuals can actually do so. They have the power to do something. They can set things right if they indeed were wrong. And so the Prophet ﷺ says in relation to, or we learn from this hadith, that the Prophet ﷺ says that the one who has a right should lodge a complaint. And as the Imam tells us, the complaint should be lodged with someone who can actually do something about it. Or secondly, aiding someone to change a wrong. And the example that the Imam gives here is when Sayyidina Umar radiyallahu ta'ala anhu ardahu, the great, mighty, blessed, noble companion, when he came to know that Abu Jandal had become addicted to wine in Sham. So this has now come to his attention. And what does Sayyidina Umar do? He writes him a letter with the following verses. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Hamim tanzilul kitab min Allahil Aziz al-Alim ghafir al-dhanb wa qabil al-tawb shadid al-iqab. That's it. It's basically in the name of Allah, the Rahman, the Rahim, Hamim, the meaning of which only Allah knows and shares with those He wants to know. This is a book that has been revealed by Allah, the Mighty, the All-Knowing. Right? He is the one that accepts, He is the one that forgives your sin, He is the one that accepts your repentance, and He is the one that's swift in reckoning. That's all he had to say. Look at the companions. Their way of understanding the world is situation, what does the Quran say about it? Situation, what does the Hadith say about it? And he's saying don't forget who you are. This is a book from Allah. He knows everything, And don't forget that He's going to forgive your sins, He accepts your repentance, but at the same time He's swift in His reckoning. That's all He needs. And they say, what happened there? Upon hearing these, Abu Jandal repented. Just needed to be reminded, that's it. Right? If this is one of the things, that we've noticed, and my brother Misbah will tell you, Nasar will tell you, when we from the West tend to go and see the Mashaykh in the Muslim lands, and we come with all these convoluted scenarios of sins and things that people are engaged in, and we present them as a question to the great teachers and the people of Allah, and we expect an equally convoluted, complex response. And what do we get from them? Just repent. That's it. There's no sort of okay, you need to. These are the 7 stages of repentance, or the amount of money you need to give to someone, or the penance that you have to engage in. Nothing like that. It's just simple. I remember hearing this with my own ears when Murabat Allah Yarhamu, Murabat al-Hajj, the great wali of Allah, someone came to him in a desert. This man lived in the deserts for I think 7 decades, right? And someone came to him to ask him a question, and in this way that I'm just describing, that people are doing this and they're doing that and this and that, and what do you say? He said one word. Just seek repentance. That's it. There was nothing more to it. And so this is important for us because it gives us a framework within which to understand how we're supposed to deal with life. Life can only be dealt with by the Quran. Life can only be dealt with by the Hadith. Life can only be dealt with by listening to the greats of this ummah. If we're going to look for the source of how we're meant to deal with life outside of these sources, we're going to fail. It's just as simple as that. And then there's nothing for us to complain about. Solace and tranquility and facilitation and understanding and removal of distress and hardship comes from these sources and no other sources. And that's why our teachers say that never ever forget the source of our power, the source of our dignity is from nothing in this world at all. The source of our power and our might and inshallah, our blessedness is because it's in Allah. As soon as we seek our power and our strength from the dunya, we're going to lose. Why? Because they're better than us. If we're going to place it in the same places that non-Muslims place their belief of where power ultimately resides, which for them is in the dunya, we'll lose. But that's what the companions understood, you see. They understood that the true source of all power is in Allah, and that's when no one can beat us. And so this idea of aiding someone to change a wrong, and Sayyidina Umar then writes this letter, what's the idea behind this? That Sayyidina Umar radiyallahu anhu wardahu did not consider the one who had told him about Abu Jandal to be a backbiter. Because someone must have informed him that, look, Abu Jandal is drinking alcohol. Right? But he didn't consider him a backbiter. Why? Because this person's aim was for Sayyidina Umar to disapprove of what Abu Jandal was doing so that he could benefit by Umar's advice in a way that no one else could have advised him. Right? But the Imam is very clear here that this is permissible if one has a sound aim. If not, it's unlawful. If you know, I know, for instance, someone, Imran knows, and I know, look, if I go and speak to Imran about this, I know he's going to say something, it's going to be more efficacious, it'll affect someone more than anyone else. So let me go and tell him, and he can go and speak to someone. The intention is not to highlight someone's fault, it's to, in fact, to discourage the other person from wrong. But the Imam is saying that, number one, if you don't believe that to be the case, that you're just going to tell some random person, oh, why don't you go and have a try? It doesn't work like that. Because you can't just reveal people's faults on the hope of a try. You have to be semi-certain that this person has some standing in that person's life, such as it's going to have some effect. The third thing that Imam tells us is what one seeks a legal ruling. For example, if someone says to a mufti or a scholar, that my brother or my father or my wife has wronged me in such and such a way. How do I deal with this situation? Right? But even there, the Imam says that the safest way is to present your question as an allusion in the third person. That what would you say about someone whose brother did this to them? What would you say about someone who's, those sorts of things? Don't need to mention any names, not any particular names, of course, but even the reason why I said that, because you don't want to say someone's wife or brother did something, inshallah, that doesn't happen. But just that you can mention someone on account of seeking a legal ruling, but it's still better. In other words, even within the permissible aspect, it's better to not do that. Or when cautioning Muslims against evil. So for example, the Imam says, you see a student of knowledge. And this student of knowledge, you see them frequenting a deviant or a corrupt person, either begun to associate with them, and you fear that this person's deviancy or corruption will pass on to the student. In that instance, you're allowed to disclose to the students the deviance or corruption of that person, as long as that corruption is factually known. Not that you think it's the case. So if you say, something about someone that you think they're devious, but there's no proof for it. You think they're corrupt, but there's no proof. We're not talking about that. We're talking about things which are factually established. Someone is known to be corrupt. Someone is known to be deviant or the like. And in that scenario, out of fear of this student of knowledge or any such person being corrupted by that individual, it's permissible to approach that person, because you're not going to them saying, let me come sit with me, let me tell you about that person. No, you're not doing that. Saying, listen, you need to be careful with the company that you're keeping, because I'm seeing that you may not be. Yeah, so you need to develop ways of how to convey this information to other people. In a similar vein, the Imam says that it's permissible to bear witness if you go to court, right? You're being asked about someone in relation to something, and it's become a legal matter now, right? You can say what you know at the prompting of a scholar to establish the facts of a case. That wouldn't come under backbiting, as long as, of course, what you're saying is true, not something you've made up. Or if someone is asking you about a person that they may be thinking of in marriage. So if for marriage purposes, someone says to you, look, I'm thinking of getting married to someone. Now the Imam's very careful here. He says, look, if someone comes to you with a request for counsel in relation to marriage, and you happen to know that this person is not good for that person, but you also know that it's sufficient that if you just said to this person, look, I don't think it's a good idea for you, and that person will listen to you, it's impermissible to say anything more than that. Right? Because it's a very sensitive matter, especially when marriage is concerned. You don't want to say anything about someone because they may get a reputation, which is unfair. Right? So the idea is that if you can establish, if you have confidence amongst you that if I say to someone, look, it's a better idea for you not to get married to this person, and you know it's going to work, that's it. You can't say anything more. But if you do know a person's not good for someone and they're not going to listen to you in that way, then you can disclose something you may know about them, but in the most respectful manner, without unnecessarily impugning someone's character. Just look, maybe I've heard, or not heard, because that's not legitimate, but it's known that this person is X, whatever it may be, and that's it. Don't add more, don't add less. Or if someone wants to give you a trust, let's say I've got some money and I want to give it to a trust, I put it in a trust with someone, and I'm seeking counsel. Look, I'm thinking of giving this money or this trust that I have to someone to keep for me. Now, it's permissible for someone to say to you in that regard that, look, I actually factually know that this person has kept people's trusts before and they've not kept them. So that's all I can say to you. That's it. Right? But again, someone is prompting you, you're not instigating anything about someone from yourself. This is an interesting one. When someone is referred to by a nickname that references a disability, this tends to refer to text. The Mashaykh here will know about this. For instance, in hadith literature, you know, حدثنا أعمش, right? Now A'mash, well, you know what it means? It means a watery-eyed one, right? So why would the scholars of hadith refer to one of the great scholars of hadith through some disability that they have, which is a watery eye? So because ordinarily I can't say that. Oh, you know that guy's got a watery eye. You can't say that. But in hadith, you do find this, and in fact, A'mash is one of the greats, right? To the point that we often think that that's just his name, and it must have a really nice meaning to it. But A'mash just means the one with watery eyes. And so the reason why the scholars did that is out of necessity to identify an exact person. Because hadith is it's not a simple science insofar as you have to be exact in relation to who you're referring to. They need to be known, and not just known. You need to identify them in as clear terms as possible so that someone cannot. Why? Because you are potentially, by misidentifying someone, letting go of a hadith. And if you let go of a hadith, you're potentially letting go of a principle of the deen or some important legal judgment in the deen. Right? So in those scenarios, it becomes permissible. And also that in this particular example, if someone becomes known in a way that they themselves don't mind, then it's still better not to, but it's not considered, you know, they know everyone calls them a certain thing, and it's, you know, but you have to be very, very careful. It's not an exact science. And the last one that the Imam mentions is speaking about someone who's openly corrupt. For example, a bar owner, or someone who drinks intoxicants openly, either drinking or smoking, whatever it may be, openly engages in the consumption of intoxicants, whether it's alcohol or drugs or anything like that. Or one who cheats or takes someone else's property with impunity. Right? Such people are outwardly corrupt and have no objection to their corruption being known. Otherwise they wouldn't do it in public. Right? So in regard to these people, the Prophet ﷺ said that whoever throws off the cloak of decency from his face, it is not backbiting to speak against him. So whoever throws off the cloak of decency from his face, they are openly corrupt, openly engaging in sin, then it is not backbiting to speak against him. Someone, however, who sins away from the public eye, that person's sanctity must be maintained. So if, let's say, you caught someone doing something by some odd, circumstance, and they weren't wanting to advertise it, you happen to pass by their house, the window's open, you saw them drinking alcohol. Well, they're doing it in the privacy of their home. It's wrong, but it's not enough for you to now going and telling people, oh, I saw them drink. You shouldn't be looking in the house. Right? So that's why I've said many, many times, the inside of a house is sacred. No one can transgress the sacredness of the house. It's inviolable. When you go to someone's house, you go with your eyes closed. You don't narrate what you see. You don't tell people what you see, what you observe, what they've got on their walls. They had a Christmas tree in their house, or they had pictures on the walls. It has none of your business. It has nothing to do with you. You go in and you come out. That's it. Even to the point that you have to be seated in the place that they tell you to sit. And you can't just willy-nilly get up and start walking around someone's house. You genuinely see that. You go to someone's house and people will just get up and walk out into the I'm just looking for the bathroom. No, you're not. Go and sit down where I've placed you. It's not your house. This is not halal for you. That's why the Turks, they had this haram lak, salam lak, which they fantasized about it in Western epics, the haram. Because they used to wonder what's going on in these harams. It's very simple. They were doing ibadah. It was that part of the house which was out of bounds for you. You're not allowed to go there. Right? Our houses here are not set up that way, but the sanctity must be observed nonetheless. Of course, if the host actually says to you, listen, you can move about as you wish, that's something different. But from our perspective, we have to respect the person's sanctity in their home. And so Hassan al-Basri, the great tabi'i, he said that there are three people for whom there is no backbiting about them. Number one, a capricious person. In other words, someone who just goes along with their desires, does what they want, openly. Number two, a corrupt person who is overt in their corruption, again, openly. And number three, an unjust leader. Because an unjust leader, what you'll see is that all three of these that are mentioned here, they openly display their sins. And not just that, they may even be proud of their sins. So to speak about such people, to warn. Again, we don't want to make it a tea party gathering about the corruption of politicians or whatever it may be. It's just highlighting, look, that person's corrupt. I don't want to talk about them. That's permissible to do that if, again, factually established. Not something you think or you've heard through hearsay. So this is the journey through the various perils, as the Imam refers to them as afat in his book Kitab Afat al-Lisan. We haven't completed all of them. There are 20 in total, and I think we did about 6. So more than half we haven't even touched on yet. And what we can see is that these 20 are essentially forming a human being. They're instructing us and teaching us and framing for us how it is that we're meant to use that great blessing that Allah has given us, the tongue. And various other chapters speak about other parts of our being that we need to also bring in line with the prophetic example. And one may wonder what the best way of doing this, and we've said it, we'll say it again. The greatest way of inculcating and implementing these things into our lives is by spending time with people who embody such traits. The more you spend with them, I'm telling you, human nature is osmotic. Well, we all study osmosis in biology, right? When something goes from one cell to another, right? That's how we are as human beings. We are osmotic beings. What's in a good being will transfer into another being. So what just remains for us is to seek out these great beings from which we can learn from their example and their lived experiences that we see, and that's what's going to influence us. Reading about it in books is good, it's helpful, don't get me wrong. But it's not the same as spending time with human beings. There's a transformative effect that takes place with human beings that's long-lasting as well and deep.